Hello and welcome. I'm Reshma Shah, a pediatrician and award-winning author, a mom, and a home cook. And today I'm going to be sharing a recipe for one of my all-time favorite cookies. This cookie is special for a few reasons. First of all, I haven't made this cookie for a single person that hasn't immediately asked for the recipe. It's that good. It's hearty, it's satisfying, and of course, it's delicious. Second, it's filled with so many nutritious ingredients that include fiber, healthy fats, and a good amount of protein. It's also an incredibly forgiving recipe because you can adjust the ingredients to suit your taste or to use what you have on hand. And finally, this cookie has a very special place in my heart because it had a profound impact on my parenting and feeding strategies. In fact, it entirely changed the way that I approached feeding my kids and my family. So before we make this amazing cookie, I want to share a little story. So many years ago, when my kids were quite young, I was still sort of figuring out my approach to creating structure and routines and traditions around feeding in my family. And even though I had been a practicing pediatrician for several years by that point, I was still facing many of the same struggles that parents face at the dinner table. I was trying to find a balance between serving meals and snacks that were nutritious, but also that my kids would actually eat and enjoy. I think that as with many things in life, there is no one perfect way of feeding your family. What works for one family might be disastrous for another. The best way that I've found to gauge whether a particular feeding strategy is working or not for your family is to notice whether it's creating more ease, enjoyment, and connection. If a mealtime strategy is escalating tension, creating stress, or undermining your connection to your child, it may be time to reassess. And that's exactly what happened with the first version of my chickpea chocolate chip cookies. I had been reading about a mealtime strategy in which you sneak in specific ingredients to boost the nutritional value of the meal or snack you're serving. So whether it was adding greens to a smoothie or, in my case, chickpeas to a chocolate chip cookie, the basic idea was to add in these healthy ingredients in sort of a sneaky way so that your kids wouldn't even notice that they were there. It sounded like a winning strategy. My kids would be eating more nutritious foods and I wouldn't have to deal with the fuss and the complaining. And so I made my original version of my chickpea chocolate chip cookies. They were filled with so many wholesome ingredients and I thought the kids would never notice the difference. My kids were so excited to come home and find a batch of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. And to be honest, I was pretty much ready to accept an award for Parent of the Year. Well, let me tell you, things did not go exactly as planned. Apparently, I hadn't pureed the chickpeas until they were quite smooth enough. So when he bit into the cookie, he found a rogue chickpea. And he looked up at me in astonishment and asked me if I had actually put chickpeas in our chocolate chip cookies. And I had to come clean. Yes, there were chickpeas in these cookies. He kindly put the cookie down and let me clearly know that he would not be participating in my shenanigans of trying to sneak these wholesome ingredients into our everyday recipes. And for weeks after what I call Cookiegate, my kids would look at me with a lot of suspicion, wondering if I had snuck lentils into the muffins or shredded zucchini in our pasta sauce. I realized that my very well-intended plan of including more foods like beans and whole grains and vegetables into everyday foods completely backfired because I lost their trust. And from that moment on, I realized that for our family, the strategy of sneaking ingredients into everyday foods was not a helpful strategy. The slight chance that they might get an extra serving of vegetables wasn't worth the loss of trust and connection. But don't worry, the story has a happy ending. So I actually liked the flavor of the chickpeas in the cookies, and so I kept working to sort of tweak and modify the recipe. And many years later, I happened to be in the car with my daughter. We were on the way to sports practice, and I had a newer version of these chickpea chocolate chip cookies in the car with me. And she sort of looked down at the cookie and she said, "Well, what's that, Mom?" And I sort of jokingly said, "Do you remember those chickpea chocolate chip cookies I used to make? Well, I've been working on the recipe and I think I've come up with a better version." And I was surprised to hear her say, "Well, would you mind if I tried it?" I said, "Of course, please, give it a go. Let me know what you think." She bit into the cookie and she kind of nodded her head and she said, "Mom, it's actually pretty good." And so I realized that for our family, the strategy of sneaking ingredients into foods just didn't work. Now, I'm all for a delicious lentil bolognese or black bean brownies. I've just let go of the idea that I need to sneak these ingredients in order for my kids to eat them. They've actually been pretty accepting of recipes that include added beans or vegetables. In fact, one of my son's favorite meals is lasagna made with my homemade tofu ricotta. So the moral of this story is that you want to use feeding strategies that don't undermine trust. As parents, we're in it for the long game, and we want to use feeding strategies that emphasize enjoyment, nutrition, and connection. Okay, now let's make these famous chickpea chocolate chip cookies. A lot of cookie recipes start by creaming butter and sugar together, and the base of this recipe, which is going to be made up of chickpeas, creamy peanut butter, and maple syrup, is going to take the place of the butter and sugar in traditional chocolate chip cookie recipes. To a food processor, we're going to add one 15-ounce can of chickpeas, rinsed and drained, along with half a cup of creamy peanut butter, a half a cup of maple syrup. You could also add a third of a cup if you want a less sweet version, a generous teaspoon of vanilla. One of the tweaks that I've made through the years is to also add a tablespoon of yellow miso paste. It gives a cookie a slight salted caramel taste. If you don't have yellow miso paste or you don't want that flavor, just leave it out and instead add a small pinch of salt. If you are using the miso paste, don't add any additional salt because the miso paste is already a bit salty. And you're going to puree this mixture until it's nice and smooth. You don't want any rogue chickpeas in your chickpea chocolate chip cookies. And you can see how nice and creamy the mixture is. I'm going to set this aside while I prepare my oats. Next, I'm going to add 1.5 cups of oats right into the food processor. I'm going to pulse the oats just a few times until they're somewhere between the consistency of oats and oat flour. I like the texture and consistency of the oats this way, and since the food processor is already dirty, I'll just pulse my oats a few times to get them a little finer. And I'll just add my oats to the chickpea peanut butter mixture, along with half a cup of almond flour. The almond flour helps to bind things together, but if you don't have almond flour, you could just use extra oats. And next come all of what I like to call the add-ins. This is where you can have some flexibility. Today I'm using chocolate chips, chia seeds, hemp seeds, and some chopped walnuts. If you don't want to use the additional seeds and nuts, you could also just add an extra half a cup of rolled oats. You could also use raisins or other dried fruits to replace some or all of the chocolate chips. So I've got a 1/4 cup of chia seeds, a 1/4 cup of hemp seeds, half a cup of chopped walnuts, and 1 to 2 cups of chocolate chips, depending on how chocolatey you like your cookies. And you're just going to mix to combine. These cookies are more dense than regular chocolate chip cookies. There's no leavening agent, so they really don't spread or rise. I like to think of them as a cross between a cookie and an energy ball or bar. I'm going to use an ice cream scoop to measure out my cookie, and I've got a regular size ice cream scoop, but you could also use a mini scoop if you want a smaller cookie. So I'm just going to scoop them out on a parchment-lined baking sheet. You can put them pretty close together because, as I mentioned, they don't really rise or spread. And I'm just going to press them gently to flatten them. Now, if you don't want to bake the whole batch all at once, you could actually freeze them at this point and bake them later. I'm going to put them in a 375-degree oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. Be careful not to overbake these. I like my cookies a little bit on the softer side, so I tend to bake them closer to the 15-minute mark. You want them slightly browned, but if you overcook them, they might be a bit dry. Once you've baked them, let the cookies cool completely, and you can store them in an airtight container for up to several days. Okay, I just pulled these cookies out of the oven, and I think the hardest part about these cookies is waiting for them to cool in order to dig in. Okay, I just want to show you what these cookies look like on the inside. My whole family loves these chickpea chocolate chip cookies, and I hope you'll give them a try. I'd love to know what feeding strategies have worked for your family. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos featuring plant-based recipes, as well as nutrition and cooking tips, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.